Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Yes, I'm inside in a studio. Well, my son won't be happy when he finds out because outside is snowing and it's so cold and I'm not even pretend I'm going for a ride. And this is an occasion for me to show you something I don't like about the Ultimate. Very small thing, very small. Yeah, okay, don't worry. And I have a secret component I got from Canyon that they didn't even know they had it. Yes, I really believe the Ultimate is an amazing bike. But it's something here, this setup and this bolt here is not something I really like. That is part of the spaces of the integrated cockpit that Canyon provides with their setups. I used to have a spacer on top of the base plate. This is the lowest you can usually go. Then you have your cockpit or the stem. I do suggest to put a small spacer on top to give the clamp a better surface to clamp on the steerer. And I've done a video on Canyon steerers that I really suggest you to watch. And I noticed that in the professional peloton, the Canyon supplied bikes don't have this setup. They do have a much shallower base plate, much smaller, that allows the stem to be completely slammed, and it creates a much better integration with the frame. So I looked at the pictures of the Canyon sponsored riders and asked Canyon about the base plate, and first they replied in a very stiff German accent, "No, we don't have the plate." And I was like, how come? So I sent them a picture, said, look, this is a bike, a factory racing bike with the base plate on, and eventually say, yeah, we do have that plate. And they say, well, yes, you can have it, but it will cost you. So they allowed me to order the base plate, and it came to me in a month or two because they don't have this readily available in stock, and it costs about £38 delivered. So for a small piece of plastic I paid the same cost per gram maybe of gold or titanium, but this is nothing comparing to the feeling of having the bike look as pro as it can be. And there it is, the base plate delivered by Canyon. So this very small piece is something that usually is not available, and with this one I will slam the stem to the very end, giving the bike a fantastic look and an even lower front end. Now you might ask what my friend is doing here, and at the same time I can hear you saying, well, you will ruin your bike because I will also cut again the steerer, and you might say you will ruin your setup, you might be aching. Yes, I understand. These are all reasonable concerns, but at the same time, the lower position does give you benefit in terms of holding the speed better in penetrating the air. The drag is less and is less strenuous for you to cycle, especially with strong headwind. And I have my friend here to demonstrate the fact that, in my opinion, you don't need to be extremely flexible. I don't even touch the ground naturally, but I have a position with the saddle and slightly forward position that allows me to just rotate a little bit more and still be comfortable with a lower position in the front, because I'm not moving from here to here. That would be compressing too much the hip angle and curving the back. I tend to maintain the same angle and I rotate overall the whole body position, moving and rotating the pelvis slightly forward. This is ideally achieved with a saddle that will prevent the perineum to get squashed. While riding with this setup, I try different positions. I try to ride for a longer period in the hoods to see whether they could sustain the lower position for longer. Try to anticipate the position I'm going to have with the lower spacer. I will measure the fork and I will show you how I will cut the steerer tube. These are the tools I'm going to use for the job. Gloves to look professional, the torque wrench when I put the bike together, the guide to cut the fork, hacksaw with the 32T blade, some fine sandpaper to smooth out the steerer when it's cut. This is to adjust and trim the brake cable, some grease for the bearings, mask of course because you don't want to breathe the carbon dust, and yes, this is more or less what I need for the job. What you want to recreate is of course the position of the top of your steerer with a distance of around 3 millimeters to the top of the spacer in this case, to allow for the top cap to have some space in between, and when you tighten the bolt with the stem bolt loose, this will gently pull up the fork and compress the bearings. Then you will be able to tighten again the bolt stem to secure the stem to the steerer. The spacer on top will allow us to cut the steerer just slightly higher, say at 2 millimeters on top of the stem. You will have 3 mil to play with when you need to lift up the fork. In this case, Canyon usually don't provide at all a reinforcement for the steerer, but for combination stand where you do have the plate pushing from the back rather than the bolt from the side, they also provide a metal reinforcement, which is something exactly like this. This is a spare one I have that sits inside the steerer tube for the weakest part of it not to be crushed by the force of the stem. This is the new base plate in place. We have to detach the top cap, loose the bolt of the stem, remove the handlebar from the steerer and remove the previous spacer. As you can see, much chunkier. And this is the position where we are going to measure the fork for the new cut. Canyon don't have a classic compression plug. Usually in all other bikes you do have a compression plug that on one hand provides the top cap bolt as an anchor to pull up the fork and the bearings, at the same time provides a reinforcement for the steerer to alleviate the pressure from the stem clamp on the steerer itself. Canyon only provides the anchor point in shape of this small expander plug that sits around here, and the top cap bolt will pull up the fork while engaging the small bung. We will have to reposition the compression plug. It needs to sit around 3.5 centimeters inside the steerer, and when we cut the fork it's going to be too high. So I'm going to push it back, retorque at 4 Newton meter, so it will provide an anchor point in the new position for the top cap bolt. Remember, we have to be extremely precise before doing the final cut. In this case we could use a 2 millimeter spacer as a guide, mark this position to cut on the steerer with a sharp screwdriver. When we have cut the steerer in this position with the correct spacer, we will have the necessary space from the steerer left in order to allow the compression of the bearings. And this is the clamp applied to the fork. I spent a bit of time to make sure that I could see through the gap here, the guide, the mark I've done on the fork. I'm happy with the cut. I put some grease on the lower bearings. I will put some carbon paste on the surface that clamped the stem, and maybe some super glue on top as well helps. Yeah, it looks great. So the steerer is poking just a little bit to give the spacer its position, and we do have our gap between the top of the spacer and the steerer, and especially when we put the reinforcement ring, the distance is going to be exactly like around 3 millimeters that we need. The top cap doesn't have a specific torque. This is really the tension just enough to compress the bearing and avoid any movement of the fork while you're braking. So I will test this out separately. Once you're happy with the compression of the bearings, then you can torque the stem plugs. Well, I'm very happy with the result. I hope in the first comments I don't receive some information that I missed a specific step of the process and created a damage that I won't be able to repair. It seems, however, that everything went well in place. I will need to trim the front brake cables before putting the brake in. The bike looks amazing. I will report on how it feels. This even further adjustment towards the slam stem. It looks so professional, that is unbelievable. I do have a spare fork just in case I've done anything wrong, but I hope it won't be needed. Thank you again for watching. Let me know your comments and any suggestions or anything else that I could have done better. I would want to know what you think. See you to the next video. Ciao.